fighter collection, and the other one is flown by Mr. Milinship from the Shuttleworth collection. There are 2 Gladiators flying in the world today, and here they are. The last of the fighting biplanes. Designing a biplane is a nice way to solve the lift equation for an aircraft. If you put 2 wings instead of 1 on half the span, you have twice the lifting power. And if you put enough horsepower in the nose, you end up with this, the most maneuverable fighting aircraft of the end of the 30s, the Gladiator. It's a very, very, very complicated aircraft, and the rebuild of the Fighter Collection 1 has been, in itself, it's worth a novel. It was a technical adventure, but it was also a human endeavor. The Gladiator was a single-seater designed during the early 30s. It was a biplane, but with an enclosed cockpit. You could close the hood and end up in a which was different from the preceding biplanes, which were all torpedoes. And you would end within a cockpit, but surrounded by these 2 wings. And in the nose there was a big engine, a Bristol Mercury engine, driving a big, huge propeller, doing that strange sound. When looking at a biplane, you have the feeling that you're looking at a very, at an old piece of engineering, enabled of high speeds and slowly climbing. And in fact, with the Gladiator, this is absolutely untrue. For a biplane, it's a fast aircraft, and of course, as a biplane, it's very, very, very maneuverable. One of the big moments in the history of the Gladiator was when the island of Malta was surrounded by German and Italian forces, and for the defense of the island, they relied on 3 Gladiators, to which nicknames were given, and one was called Hope, another one was called Faith, and the third one was called Charity. And is it because of the nicknames, or is it because of the Gladiator qualities and the competence of their pilots? But they did the job. And Malta was not completely leveled by bombers from Italy or Germany. If you look at a Gladiator from very close, and if you climb along the fuselage. And look inside, you have the feeling that you're looking at a very old Bentley, a racing Bentley, as they were used in Le Mans during the early 30s. According to those who have had the privilege to fly them, they are quite easy to fly, not tricky, no vices, just different. They pick up speed easily, and they keep energy too, in that you can climb with them. And you won't lose energy quite immediately. The aircraft will go on climbing. Thanks to this big engine and big propeller up front. Among the people who flew Gladiators, there is one which is well known for his writing, and who wrote books like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. His name was Roald Dahl, and Roald Dahl had learned to fly during the war in Kenya, and then became a Gladiator pilot, had an horrific accident in the desert, then spent months in hospitals, and then after that came back and flew again. And he flew on hurricanes in the Mediterranean, and he wrote a few books which are worth reading, like Going Solo, for instance, apart from what he did later. What he wrote later in the, like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. We are going to go on with the biplanes. This time we take the time clock backwards again. The Gladiators were still flying in the beginning of World War II. And even a few years later, in faraway places like the desert. Again, they were quite delightful to fly. Biplanes generally are different. Biplanes are really pilot dreams. A biplane normally is lightly loaded. It does lots of lift, and if it has good controls, which is a fact on the Gladiator, it becomes a pilot's dream, and it's easy, it's responsive, it's almost transparent to the hand. But of course, as a fighting machine, the Gladiator was absolutely obsolete compared to Messerschmitts or even the Italian fighters of the period, which were beautiful flyers and modern, swift and very dangerous fighting machines. So the Gladiators were state-of-the-art in 1934, let's say. But before the Gladiators were other biplanes wearing the colors of the Air Forces. Interesting, if you're in the Gold Pass area, you've just seen the Avenger unfolding its wings. We'll tell a little bit more about that later. While 3 Hawker biplanes arrived from the right. Two Nimrods and 1 Fury. In fact, it's very hard to find differences between Nimrods and Furies, but there are differences. And Hawkers at the time had refined the design of the biplane to the point that they had to start thinking about getting rid of the second wing and turning fighting aircraft into monoplanes, which they did. The Gladiator was the last of the breed, but the Hawkers, these ones, were the forerunners of the Hurricane which came not long after these aircraft were in production and in service. The Hurricane owes much to the design of the Nimrods and Furies.
The Fury was the original Hurricane was called the Fury monoplane at one stage. It was so closely allied.
Yeah, the fuselage, in fact, the lines of the fuselage were very similar. And these biplanes, while we have the Blenheim takeoff, that's a sight in itself. Those little aircraft, they were quite small. In fact, they are very small, and they do have big engines compared to their size. These aircraft were really halfway between World War I and World War II. They already had engines which were announcing the V12s, like the Merlins. They already had some systems were already preparing the path to the Hurricane, the design of the Hurricane by Sidney Camp, for instance. But at the same time, they retain characteristics which were definitely World War I. For instance, they had open cockpits. On the ground, they still had a skid on the back of the fuselage, and which was used for braking and not really for taxiing more easily on the ground. And they had no brakes on the wheels. But already their characteristics were announcing what was going to come. And they had a high rate of climb. They were really, really, really maneuverable, of course, being biplanes and lightweight and with very comfortable horsepower. And most of all, they were beautiful.
Not many places in the world you can hear three kestrels singing.
Only one. How many kestrels are still, kestrel being the engine propelling these aircraft, how many kestrels are still flying in the world? Probably 3. At least 3. But the kestrel was an engine which was announcing the Merlin. And the kestrel derived from the engines done at Rolls-Royce for the what was at the time one of the ultimate sport event internationally, which was Schneider Trophy. Which was an international competition for float planes, and where every aspect of high-speed flight was studied, and where the foundations of the Spitfire and Hurricane were laid, mostly the Spitfire by designers like Reginald Mitchell, of which we were talking about in the beginning of the afternoon. And the Kestrel engine derived from the works of Rolls-Royce during the Schneider Trophy competition. Flying the Hawkers are Goldsping, Holloway and Brown. Those biplanes are reminiscent of a period where the Royal Air Force was called the world's most comfortable aero club. These were the early 30s. And at the time, fighter pilots were young men driving little MGs.
MGs?
Yeah.
MGs.
There's one behind, cream one.
Two vital skills to be in the RAF. You had to be a very good aerobatics pilot, and you also had to play tennis very well.
Yeah, and you had people like the young Douglas Bader flying aerobatics so low that he ended up in a pile of scrap and lost both legs, and became later the legend. everybody knows about, and this was the Royal Air Force of the early 30s, and they were flying these machines. At the same time, they were going places far away. They were going in the Middle East and flying a multi-seat version of this aircraft, and in very forgotten wars or actions. But there were lots of adventures attached to the Royal Air Force at the time. And most of the leaders, young leaders of the units of the time, finally, a few years later, everybody was happy to have them around because they were experienced airmen, they had flown difficult aircraft, and they had combat experience, for some of them, going to Middle East, for instance, and flying these kind of kites. They were calling them kites. And a few years later, they were all involved into what we call the Battle of Britain, and this is it.
Well, now that's a sight to gladden your heart. And for years, we never thought we would ever see that. Not only have we got the Blenheim back in the air, but we've got 3 out of 4 Mark 1s, and at least 2 of them were built in Southampton. Now, for a long, long time, we never had a Southampton-built Spitfire in the air.